Well, we got a little garden in our backyard, and we eat all summer what we can. What we can't eat, we can, and we eat what we can. Next year we're gonna do it all again.
When is the last frost going to be? Do you have any insight on that topic?
And if you do, go ahead and grab the microphone.
I hope it's not like it was last year.
Yeah, me too. I agree.
If it happens in May, we're in trouble. And that's the last frost we've had in the Shenandoah Valley was May 18th. And that was a devastating frost. People lost a lot of their white grapes. And that frost we had last April after a very warm March was terrible.
We lost a lot of trees.
Yeah,
Our last frost last year was May 20th.
May 20th.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you never know when you're farming until the crop has been harvested. What's going to happen? There's always a potential. And even then, once you've harvested it, yeah, it's true. So, somebody asked me a question, and I don't see him here. Where is he? He's gone. He asked me about tree paste.
Yeah, please share.
So
Tree paste.
paste, and that's something that has been used for a long time. Old traditional farmers, and then the biodynamic people put their twist on it, and basically taking 1 part clay and 1 part sand or silica and 1 part manure. And in biodynamics, we bury a cow's horn or 2 or 3 each fall around the equinox, and we stuff it with the manure from a lactating cow. And a lot of people come to my farm and they don't get this, but you know, the horn is the sinus of the cow. The bony horn keeps growing the cow's entire life, and it's hollow. There's blood vessels and nerves, but every breath the cow takes circulates into her horns. And the cap covers the horn, and that's what our fingernails are made of, same material. It's a specialized hair. Yeah, it's actually a type of hair. And so if you have a cow, a healthy cow I'm talking about, living out in a field, not somebody being fed grain or on a feedlot, but so basically she is just this mellow creature that eats and digests. She's a digesting machine. And every breath goes into that horn.
I didn't know that.
So when you slaughter your cow or she dies, and you take the cap off, which is pretty easy, you just tap it around the base with a soft hammer like you would be tapping tile with. That's good for about 3 years, and it's absorbed the breaths of digestion. And so think of a sourdough starter that might be kept in a wooden bowl. How if you put some new dough in there, it's going to jumpstart because of those compounds that are already there.
It's breathing at that point.
And so we put it in the ground for 6 months in this horn, and then we take the horn out in the spring, and that is like this magic compost. So when I make tree paste, I put in manure that I find from the cows, and then I'll put clay, which I have in the ground already on my property. And for the silica, I can add a little sand, but I'm trying to make a paste. And so, guess what? Here's my equisetum again. I'll boil up a bunch of equisetum, and I'll use that tea as a base to make my paste. And I also, sometimes in the spring, I will put in food-grade diatomaceous earth, which are little diatoms from the ocean. And so you stir that all together and you paste the tree from the root where it hits the ground up over all the bark. and you can really restore the health. You're also packing in any little bore holes and other things that are going on. If there's any wounds when I'm doing pruning this time of year, I'll also make tree paste and cover all my wounds. But the paste that I put in, that I make right around June, I'll give a final pasting, particularly to all my little baby trees, and I throw oodles of the diatomaceous earth in there. And so then when it dries, even though when you put it on, it's kind of a brownish looking, when it dries, it's pure white, which is good sun protection for those young trees. And you're not going out and buying latex paint and other stuff like that. It's just diatoms. And it's like magic. And the sun hits it and it dries. And
Does your tree paste help with bark beetles?
a little bit, particularly with more of that diatomaceous earth in there. Makes it a little harder and less attractive
It's
to
a
them.
big problem out here right now is the bark beetles.
Beetles
so-
are devastating. And the other thing is, don't water near the base of your trees,
Yeah.
because it softens it, it causes rot, and those bark beetles are tough.
They're
you know.
a pain.
Yeah.
Is what they are.
And you might have something to deal with bark beetles.
Tell us about bark beetles.
Oh, you might deal with
Prevent them. It's a hard one. I can't even answer that.
So my opinion with the bark beetles is the reason the trees are getting beetles is because the forest is unhealthy. It's not being burned regularly, so it's not getting its mineral dose. It's not capturing and storing more water into the roots. So there's lots of reasons why the trees are getting beetles. It's not necessarily because the beetles are there, it's because the plants are slightly unhealthy. What we need to do to fix that is make the forest healthy again. And that's pretty much the answer, because healthy plants and healthy people don't get sick.
Is exactly right. That's
How do you make a forest healthy?
Oh, there's so many different ways. So the answer to all permaculture questions is it depends.
It depends.
It depends on what forest and what they're going to let us do. But the Native Americans burned every 2 or 3 years, and that replenished the soil with minerals. And that's,
Weather permitting.
yeah, no, every year, every couple years. They would always burn in the fall at the onset of oncoming rains. And they didn't have the crazy amounts of brush like we had, so it was always a low ground fire, to the point where books and history would say they would put it out if it got close to their camp with their blankets. So like there was always low growing like grass fires and bush fire. It was never a 70-foot wall of flames coming at you at 100 miles an hour. So it's hard at this point because we can't necessarily go directly back to that because we have so much brush. In my opinion, the answer to that is animals. They're going to replace that system quite a bit.
Wonderful.
Who has the next question?
This one goes to all three of you. Do you have any tips / tricks that are like golden that you go by every year for your craft or what you do? And maybe just one to share with us each. One of your favorite tips or tricks that helps your.
My favorite trick is just keep gardening. Because like he said, you can't predict anything. Farming and gardening is like gambling. You don't know when things are going to happen, how much rain you're going to get, whether it's going to frost or not, which bugs are going to come, how many birds are going to show up and eat your seeds. You don't know. So the answer is just keep gardening and just keep farming.
Well said.
And mine is similar. Pay attention. Just be with your plants all the time. And that way you see when things are starting to happen. You can jump on it with a little something. And again, I brought two of my favorites there. I always make sure the plants get a good dose of nettle tea. And my grapes get the equisetum. I also spray the grapes with kelp. Kelp is, I use maxi crop, and that gives them a nice balance of minerals too that they might be missing.
Okay. My biggest tip would have to be that I don't plant my garden until after Frog Jump. And the bees start in April. They start to swarm in April. So everything starts after fair.
Yeah,
But you hold that.
yeah, ditto.
I have another question. This one's for Jess. What is a horticulturist, and do you consider yourself one?
A horticulturist is a blanket of all the cultures. So there's vermiculture, there's viticulture, which is grapes, there's agriculture, of course, and I'm forgetting 3 of them. I think there's 6 or 7 different cultures, and I am an aspiring horticulturist. I'm always learning, I'm always working towards figuring out how to solve the problems of gardening and my livestock as well as my bees. My bees are a livestock. And horticulture just kind of is, like I said, it's a blanket of all of the different cultures. And a little bit of knowledge of each one goes a long way. And they all kind of help each other, like permaculture does. It's all about the partner planting and the partner growing and keeping animals that keep with each other, and they all help each other. It's a big circle of life. It's a big circle of life.
Yes. How do you farm in a climate that is changing? That we know that is changing. And what's your reading on that as the year is passing?
Can you repeat the questions?
How do you farm in a climate that's changing?
Yeah, that we know right now that is.
The same way I live amongst it. I'm in it. So are the plants. We're all in it together.
Pay attention to it.
Yeah.
Do you see any predictions, like in the next 5, 10 years?
No, I used to think I could predict, and I did pretty well. Not anymore. No. You know, it could get, probably will be more extremes if we think of it. But there's another dimension that I have evolved into that I didn't quite get when I was really little or younger. But there is a concept called love. And that love, if you meet my chickens, they all are very close friends, you know, and they have acres of ground to run around in. They got a cute little home to go into at night. But they'll come running to me. And
they're always together.
And that's true if you're taking care of bees. When you truly feel a connection of love, and plants as well. It sounds silly, you're out there talking to your basil plants or whatever, but there's a connection that comes, and that's important. So you're all kind of working together when you're on your farm, and you're paying attention just like you would to roommates or lovers or whatever you have around you. If you're all really tuned in, it's going to be better.
So I have a saying, diversity is the buffer for human ignorance. So the way we relate this in permaculture is instead of fishing with a line, like most people do, so it's like I grow only one thing and I only do this. It's like fishing with a line. If that line snaps, you lose everything. Instead of fishing with a net, you can lose 60% of your connections in the net and still catch a fish or catch food or grow food. So the more elements in the systems you have, the more of them can fail, and you'll still have food, you'll still have connections, and you'll still have feeding the landscape, and you'll still have all of those things. So just diversify, because diversity brings more life, diversity buffers more life, diversity feeds more life, and that's really the answer to the climate change problems. Because like you said, in my opinion, there's going to be stronger, harder winters, there's going to be hotter summers, and that's like, in some ways, the only thing you can predict is it's probably going to be more extreme on either end every time. But at the same time, if you think about it, you're going to get more water in the winter to take advantage of, if you can take advantage of it, which is good. So that means we'll have less water problems if you can handle it. And then in the summer, the best tomatoes are always when it's really, really hot. Like, no one likes a January tomato that just tastes like nothing. So the best fruits, the best peaches are when it's really hot, all those kind of things. So it matters. So in some ways, just diversify, plant more things, grow more things, try more things. And that's my answer to the climate change problem.
I'd like to add on to that. That word diversity is huge. And I plant as many flowers as I do vegetables. I want as much on my farm as possible, because then you're attracting all the beneficials and they'll all take care of each other. The more you have for them to eat and see and smell. So that
Big
is
fan of
huge.
chrysanthemums over here. Big fan of chrysanthemums.
Everything, you know.
Yeah.
I have a question about honey, and you guys might know this also, but like, what's the? I mean, so like I see like blackberry honey, star thistle honey. Do these bees particularly work with that plant to get a certain flavor? How? I'm just confused.
So when a honey is labeled, say clover honey or blackberry honey, sometimes they're infused with a blackberry flavor versus when they're in bloom. So when blackberries are in bloom and the bees are harvesting from that flower, if you're paying attention and you check and you know when they're collecting the pollen and the nectar from that flower, you can go into your hive and you can harvest the honey that they have built from collecting that pollen and that nectar, and you can label it correctly as such. Say it's blackberry season, so we're going to collect blackberry honey at the right time, or right now manzanita's in bloom, and manzanita honey is very sweet, so you can kind of see the difference in the hive versus the colors. And also the thistle honey is very popular, and that's what we have most of out here is star thistle honey, because we have copious amounts of star thistle. So if I go out after the star thistle has bloomed and I harvest the thistle honey, it will be a really light color and it will be very sweet. But usually when you see a flavored honey, it's infused with a flavoring. So, do you know more about that?
I don't raise my bees for their honey. I raise them to be pollinators. And if they swarm on me or at swarming time, I might peek in that part of the hive and steal a little bit, but that's not why I have a beehive.
She covered it. You just can't trust commercial people. They're always lying
Yeah,
to you.
don't trust commercial bees.
What can we do with star thistle? How can we use star thistle?
Or invasive species.
Well, if you don't want it, you better realize those seeds can last for 50 years, but you dig it out, you keep it from blooming, you can graze it with some animals at
I think
times.
she's asking how it can be used.
How you can use it?
Yeah.
Or whatever we should do with it, tell us.
Yeah, I've got it in places where I don't really like it, so I chop it out,
Goats.
and I'll burn that debris. I've even composted it by itself, but I don't want to contaminate my other piles. Permaculture.
So in permaculture, we only use plants native plants, plants native to planet Earth. There's no such thing as a weed. There's no such thing as a pest. It's only a plant that you don't want in the spot you don't want it. All plants have a use, and in general, weeds are only there because they're fixing a problem. So taprooted plants, generally deep, rich taprooted plants are fixing compacted soils because they're breaking it up. Fibrous plants that are really runny, like Bermuda grass, is holding soil together that's usually too loose. Clovers are there because they're fixing soil that has little nutrients in it, so it's adding nutrition to it. In some ways, the ways to get rid of weeds are to, instead of trying to get rid of it by chopping it and doing things like that, is to heal the soil and get rid of the trigger. So all weeds have germination triggers which get them to germinate. So certain types of weeds will germinate when it's extra, like example, as I told someone earlier, if you just go out and you weed eat your star thistle, you're chopping all the biomass into little small pieces, and the sun is going to hit the soil all summer long, and it's just going to bake that soil. All those little pieces that you chopped into pieces are going to oxidize and lose most of their nutrient value, so you just made the soil more nutrient poor. Well, what's going to try and fix poor nutrient soil that's compacted? Star thistle. So in some ways, by trying to get rid of it, sometimes people are promoting the growth of the actual thing they're trying to get rid of, instead of just trying to heal the soil. So as an example, at the farm it was basically an entire field of star thistle. And we're at about 5% star thistle left by just rotationally grazing with animals, cover cropping, compost teas, just building soil, healthy soil. And healthy soil doesn't have pest weeds because it has healthy plants. And the more you disturb the soil, the more you damage the soil, the more weeds you're going to get. So if you just go rototill your garden, you're going to get so many weeds. There's a saying in England, they say, plow for 1, plant for 7, which means plow for 1 year, you get weeds for 7 years because it takes 7 years to fix that soil. So we're trying to, like, in some ways advance succession to the point where the weeds don't even want to germinate anymore because there's no triggers for them to germinate. A great example is in New Zealand. They have a weed tree called grouse. It was just taking over New Zealand, and they do so many things to try and get rid of it. They burn it, they bulldoze it, they do all these things, and then they eventually gave a plot of land to the Maori, which are the native people to New Zealand, and they didn't do anything. And it turns out in about 10 years, the grouse starts flowering heavily, and it has really good seeds for birds. But those birds come from areas which have tropical jungle. So they come and they land there, and they drop their seeds in there. And then in about another 5 years, you start getting succession plants from jungles to grow through the grouse. And then they start shading out the grouse, and then in about 5 to 10 years after that, the grouse is all gone and you have native tropical forest. So doing nothing in some ways is better than trying to do something negative to get rid of it. And star thistles like that, Bermuda grass is like that, crabgrass is like that. All those plants are there to try and fix something that you potentially have destroyed. And that's our stance in permaculture with weeds. Because in some ways, there's all kinds of things that can be weeds. As an example, last year I let some purple mustard go to seed, and right now in my carrot bed, it's basically purple mustard, and that's a weed. Even though last fall it was not a weed, it was something that we were actually intentionally growing. So in some ways, like I said earlier, with thinking about plants as friends, like you're observing them, you're interacting with them. The more you learn about them, the more you observe them, the more you learn their good traits as well as their bad traits. In the beginning, you notice star thistle is bad because it pokes you. Well, you don't notice any of the good things that it's doing because you immediately eradicated it because it poked you. Instead of saying, oh, what can this thing do to it? What is it doing to the soil? It's breaking it up. It's putting biomass onto the ground. It's keeping grazers off of it. So like, it's really in some ways just fixing the soil, and that's what star thistle is generally doing to the landscape. In the terms of what star thistle wants, it's about a 100-year cycle to fix things. We can speed that up into about a 3 or 4 year cycle by just doing positive things like rotationally grazing animals and putting compost teas and compost and biomass on the ground, improving the carbon in the ground. So we do this thing what we call pasture chipping, where you just go in about October, November, you just go put 1 inch of wood chips on the ground or less, just enough to where stuff is going to grow through it. And if you do that 3 or 4 times, it'll basically eliminate the star thistle completely, improve the carbon in the ground, and give you higher quality species, which is like no stickers, no foxtails, none of those kind of things.
Goat heads are
And
my
goat head,
favorite.
I call those goat. Let's just call them goat heads. I was going to say something else.
Could you explain that process again with the wood chips?
Okay, so I call it pasture chipping. So basically, you can do this like on any poor pasture. We use it in the long term to set up gardens. So you just basically, if you put too many wood chips, it'll smother everything. If you just put enough, it'll still grow through it. And you think of like, oh, it didn't kill the weeds, they grew through it. Well, now you have vegetation growing above the carbon. In the fall, it gets laid down. Now you have a layer of soil, carbon, biomass. You do another layer, and then eventually you end up with these layers of soil, carbon, biomass, carbon, biomass, carbon, biomass. But then the bottom one starts decomposing into soil. And then you start increasing the organic matter content in the soil, which is a trigger for less invasive weeds like star thistle and et cetera, and foxtails. You eventually start moving towards like higher quality grasses like some annual rye and things like that. And then in the long term, you start getting perennial ryegrass or perennial grasses, which is what all of California was before we came here. Perennial grasses have roots that go down potentially 20 feet. It used to be green here in August before we came and overgrazed and stopped burning and doing all these negative things to the landscape. So pasture chipping is a really easy way to build soil, and wood chips are, for some people, is a ridiculous easy resource to get. At our farm, they just bring them to me by the hundreds and hundreds of yards. It's a problem.
I can help with that.
And if you look at those wood chips, particularly if they're chipped from green wood, you'll get that fungal activity, and that's what we're really looking for, the mycorrhizal world to get going again.
Be careful leaving those in piles, they might set on fire.
If they're big
If
enough,
they
yes.
fall,
big enough.
they would. Other questions?
Next question.
I have a question about the difference in function between bacterial soils and like what does a fruit tree need versus an annual, and what are the types of soil they prefer?
The acidity and whatnot.
So he was wondering what the difference between fungal soils and bacterial soils are and the effects they have on plants. So bacterial soils end up giving you more annual plants. So you end up with annual grasses and annual vegetables and annual things like that. As you start to move into the succession of the landscape, because a landscape will never stay the same. It's always going to succession. It's going to start as, let's say, a natural disaster. So we have a volcano that goes off. The volcano goes off and it just nukes the entire area. An oak tree is not going to be the first thing that comes back because all the fungus was destroyed. The first thing that comes back are bacteria. So bacteria leans towards all your annual grasses and your annual weeds. That starts adding carbon and nutrients to the soil, which eventually gives you a little bit more carbon, which leads us towards plants that have more lignins in them. The more lignin a plant has, which is the more woody, the more it feeds fungus, which leads you towards the next succession of plants, which grows. So it'll go annual weeds, annual grasses, and then you'll start to get like maybe some blackberries or something growing in it. And then into the blackberries, you'll start getting annual shrubs, and then out of that, you'll start getting perennial trees, and then eventually you'll end up to climax forest, which is like oak trees and chestnuts and things like that. In permaculture, we're trying to, in some ways, pick a succession and hold it there. So like for annual vegetable gardens, you want mostly bacterial, but a little bit of fungal. For growing berries and things, you want more fungal, and if for fruit trees and nut trees, you want almost pure fungal. So you can kind of hold it there based on your interactions with animals, your interactions with you as with machines or tools, and that way you can kind of pick the clean, sweet spot and keep it there.
Where's a good place to find that information?
The internet,
The internet.
the College of
Do you have a
College of
website?
Google.
I like Google. That's where I learned how to keep bees.
Yeah.
But do you know of a website or anybody?
So there is a great book called something Forest Gardens. It's Dave Jackie and something like that. It's a 2-part book, and it's a really good. It's about $100, but it explains all of the different annual and perennial plants and perennial weeds, perennial vegetables, and trees and fruit trees and nut trees that grow in a temperate climate, basically. And that's one of the best books in my opinion. And it talks about that succession of fungal and bacterial and which plants grow best at what stage, and that way you can kind of pick where to put it in your landscape. So that way you can have some sections that are bacterial, some sections that are mid, and some sections that are fungal. And then that way you can put the plants that you want in the right spots so then they actually thrive. Because if you plant an oak tree in the middle of a pasture, in the beginning it just kind of doesn't do very much. But if you also plant a lettuce plant in the middle of a forest, it also doesn't do very much. So it's like finding that balance of where a plant is located in your landscape in the succession that you also want. Generally, in commercial farming, it's always succession 0 because they rototill. And it just goes back to 0 every single time. And that way you get all those annual weeds that just cause people to go crazy and
You're a big
spray
advocate
around.
of no-till, huh?
Generally, yes. There are certain times where it's potentially beneficial, but generally no. We don't do any tilling because it's just way too much work.
Wait, can you talk more about that? Tilling versus not tilling?
So nature doesn't till the soil. Tilling is you get a machine and you're just pulverizing everything. You're just destroying the soil, but you're also creating a compaction layer under. And in our climate, having a compaction layer 6 inches down and pure fluff above it is an instant, how fast can this dry out? It's just gonna go poof. In the middle of, you're gonna water it in the morning, and by the end of the day, it's bone dry. Versus at our farm, we've been no-till for about 7 years now, and I've got about 5 feet of black rich topsoil. to the point where I can take a 5-foot piece of rebar and just by hand push it all the way into the ground. And when I first came to the farm, I could only go in about 6 inches to where the till line was. Once you start to get to that point, you can start to get roots that go down 3 or 4 or 5 feet. Now they have access to more water, more nutrients, more minerals, and you can get plants that can grow all summer without water. So we'll plant our tomatoes, we'll water them once, and for the rest of the season they get nothing.
Actually, they're getting water, but
It's not that they're not getting water. I'm not watering them.
Yeah, that's
They're
it.
getting it from the landscape because we, like we said, we get more than enough water in the landscape every winter, even in the dry year. One of the master gardeners that in Sonora, they were talking about how I was dry farming and how it's pretty hard, and I was like, all right, what is the most water-intensive thing you can think of? And they thought of a watermelon. And I was like, okay, this is easy. So I dry farmed watermelons that year. Just to prove that it could be done. And it was a pretty dry year. And it was the juiciest, crispiest, most delicious watermelon I've ever had because it sent down roots deep and it was gathering nutrients and minerals really well. So now that you're not tilling your soil, you can start building soil. And there's 2 ways to build soil. You can build soil up and you could build soil down. Ideally, you're doing both at the same time. So roots build soil down. So when you have a plant, as an example, amaranth. Amaranth can grow 8 feet tall, but it can also send roots down 8 feet into the ground. When that plant dies, at the end of the season, what's happening to all those roots? They're decomposing. So now you have these compost corridors going down 8 feet. So the next succession of plants can follow those corridors down. And then when they die, they compost. And then you just pulse that cycle over and over, and that's building soil down. But at the same time, you're taking that biomass and loading it on top and creating a mulch, a protective skin on the soil. It's almost like the skin for your body. That's the mulch to the landscape. When you get a cut, you get a scab. And to the landscape, a scab is a weed. The weed is there as a scab. It's trying to fix your skin. And eventually the scab goes away and you end up with skin again, which is nice mulch. So now you're building biomass on top and you're building biomass down low. So you're building soil up and building soil down. And in the long term, it's much, much better for anything you can possibly do.
Yeah, just another maybe a simple thing for gardeners. At the end of the season, a lot of people pull everything out of the ground. Don't do that. Cut it right there at the ground or bend it over and leave that root structure to be there. It's a worm haven, it's a forest going down that composts.
I love worms.
Yeah.
I'm super curious about the tilling, no till. I know this isn't necessarily like a formal dissertation on the matter, but I'm just curious about strategic tilling to jumpstart a system. Like, yeah, and or what you would recommend as far as like, if literally we're just starting a 1 acre garden from like literally a meadow.
You might need to till, but plant a cover crop. Cover that ground right away, get roots going in the ground.
Yeah, exactly. My question is for you guys, like, what particular mixes of cover crops for this region, like a meadow space, that you would recommend for jumpstarting the processes that you were just mentioning?
Clovers, legumes, they fix nitrogen in the soil.
Clover's a really big one, and clover is a really big one, as well as peas. Peas give a lot of nitrogen into your soil, but you could probably answer this better than I can.
So there's a difference between tillage and disturbance. Nature disturbs the soil all the time. It does not till the soil. So like as an example on our farm, if I was to just want to start a new 1 acre field and I wanted to turn it into a vegetable garden, I would disturb it with chickens or pigs. They're adding fertility, they're adding biology, and they're adding disturbance. And then you follow that with a cover crop. That depends on the season. So there's summer cover crops, spring cover crops, fall cover crops, and winter cover crops. It depends if you have water or not to do the summer cover crops. Generally, winter cover crops are easier because you don't have to do anything, it just rains. That could be peas and vetch and rye and oats and favas and phacelia and bell beans and all those kind of things. In the summer, we like to do like sunflower and sorghum and cowpeas and buckwheat and things like that. Really, the more diverse the cover crop, the better, because you're feeding more aspects of the soil biology as well as attracting and accumulating more minerals. So like for me at the farm, if I was to start a new plot, it would be chickens, followed by cover crop. And then if I wanted to use it at that point, you could terminate the cover crop with by scything it, or by using a tarp like some people do, just different methods. Or if it's not ready for it, you just keep that cycle going. Chickens, cover crop, chickens, cover crop, chickens, cover crop, chickens, cover crop. And if you do that 6 or 7 times, you're gonna have some ridiculous soil. And then it's also gonna be less weedy, and you're gonna have less work, and you're gonna get eggs out of it. And the eggs pay for your fertility.
And don't throw away your eggshells.
Yep.
You know, put them in, and you know, I actually run them through a blender and turn it into egg powder, and I put that in my compost as well.
Do you roast it first?
No. Yeah.
I do the KNF stuff.
Pistol and mortar it. I do. I
Yeah.
bang the heck out of it.
Yeah.
I remember you were saying about using a post pounder last time, a post pounder upside down, and then with a T-post in it to smash up crystals.
Yeah, so I do that. That's to break up these quartz and other crystals that I might happen to have. So that's a whole other thing in the biodynamic realm. We take silica, and that's why this equisetum is so good. But we also we pulverize the quartz down into a powder, and we bury it for a summer in a cow horn. And then I'll take a pinch of that, like 1/8 of a teaspoon, in 4 gallons of water, and stir it for 1 hour. And then I do that before the sun comes up. And I do this just in the spring when the it might be grapes, whatever fruit you're looking at has just formed, and you spray it above the crop, and it showers this microfilm of silica, and it increased photosynthesis. That's what it's doing. If you do it in the middle of the day, you'll burn your plants. But if you do it just at sunrise, it coats everything, and I find that I get great crops out of that. Seems to jumpstart all the photosynthesis for the plants. And that's what I pound it with.
Yeah, that's
First I break them with I put on goggles and I break them down, and then I'll put them in the T-post thing and smash. And then finally, I take a wine bottle on heavy, like 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch thick glass. I have some pieces, and I use it like a rolling pin, and I turn it into powder.
Oh, okay. And so it's more easily absorbed. or
Yeah,
more easy
you use so little. Everything is very minute. That's true in all of biodynamics. All the teas are as dilute as you want them to be. It's homeopathic in that sense.
There's another
Encouraging.
tip, less is more. Less is always more.
I think less is more, yeah.
I have a question.
I had someone tell me that where I'm at, that there's a lot of soapstone and that has talc and arsenic and to not grow on that natural soil. What is your opinion on that if you do have a lot of soapstone?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it would probably grow well.
So those heavy metals and things are only a problem if your pH goes either too high or too low. If you keep your pH around 7, which it should, 6.5, 7, none of those things are bioavailable into the liquids or the water of the plant. So like once you start getting down into like 4 and things like that, now you start getting those things into soluble states, and they end up in your food potentially. But as long as your soil isn't too high or too low, you don't have to worry about it at all.
Okay, so I need to test the pH then.
Yeah, and generally it's not going to be, if it was at 4, nothing is growing. And if it was at 9 or more, nothing is growing. It's just, everything would just die because that's too high and too low of a pH.
I have a ton of star thistle and clover that just,
I would guesstimate you're somewhere around 7, 6.5-ish. That would be my guess. You can always test it if you're worried about it. Soil tests are always good to do in the beginning because you can kind of tell what you're starting with.
Somebody had a question over here.
So I have some fruit trees on a hill. Should I be
Good.
planting something in between the fruit trees? There's
put some animals out there. I wouldn't. A hill is a great space for a tree. It drains. Yeah. It's- I think.
They do okay. My thing kind of struggles, but
Hmm.
I was just wondering if I should be planting anything in between, something that might help keep moisture.
Are you irrigating?
I don't know.
Are you,
Are you are you giving these trees water?
at the base or generally around the
I
tree?
give it water at the base because whoever planted them before I moved there, so tree and then sandbags, and I just water behind it.
You want to water where the drip line of the tree is or further out,
Yeah.
sending those roots there. You don't want to be watering near the base of the tree for starters. And you could put marigolds out there if you're, gophers don't like those as much.
Yeah, so we have a saying, abundance promotes laziness and challenge promotes growth. If you water at the base of the tree has no reason to put out roots past where you're watering. If you water out from the tree, it has a reason to grow further out. So watering it, like you said, watering at the base of the tree is like one of the worst things you can do. If you want to plant something between them, you're going to obviously need to be irrigating in the summer if you have that water. If you don't need to plant anything in between them. In the winter, like this time of year, you could easily have all kinds of cover crops. And then through the summer, you could have animals grazing those cover crops and cycling those nutrients into fertility and so on and so on. So it really, like I said, it depends. It just depends on what you're trying to achieve and what your goals are. Do you want just fruit? Do you want fruit and soil? Do you want fruit and biomass? Do you want fruit and other crops to grow? Alley cropping is a thing where you have a row of trees, a row of vegetables, a row of trees, a row of vegetables, and that way, like, while you're watering your vegetables, the trees are creeping in over time, and then eventually the trees cover up and then you have your orchard. But in the first 5 years of that orchard's life, you get your vegetables. And that way you're getting 2 for 1. You're watering your trees away from the root, the stem of the tree, and you're getting vegetables. So once again, challenge promotes growth and abundance promotes laziness. Savory, he used to live in Africa, and it was his job to figure out why the landscape was dying. And he said, I think it's because there's too many elephants. So they went through and killed thousands and thousands and thousands of elephants, and the landscape still was dying. Well, it must be the buffalo, so they started killing all the buffalo. And little did he know at that time that there was the animals that were regenerating the landscape. Fast forward to the present future or the present day, Alan Savory will go into Africa, into an area where there is literally nothing. He will pay any of the little kids who can go into the landscape and find a blade of grass, and they cannot find a blade of grass. So he goes in there and he puts 15 times the amount of cattle as recommended onto that landscape, but for a very, very short period of time. So instead of leaving there for 6 months, they're there for 1 day. And then they move, and they're there for 1 day, and they move, and they're there for 1 day. And in 2 years, the grass is this tall. Yep, just absolutely. There's a TED Talk by Alan Savory. You can watch it, and it's absolutely amazing how animals are rehabilitating the landscape. So in my opinion, to save the world, we need more furry and feathered friends by an enormous amount. We need millions upon millions upon millions of chickens. We need millions and millions of pigs. We need millions and millions of cows, properly managed. Because not managed, they're going to denude the landscape, and that's how you get desertification in the Middle East. That used to be the Fertile Crescent. It used to be ridiculous. The cedars of Lebanon used to be so big and so huge that they put the redwoods to shame. The Romans cut them all down to make ships. They continued to graze everything with goats, and now we have a desert. There's another great documentary called Hope in a Changing Climate. It's about China and the Laos Plateau. It's basically pure desert. They went in there and they did some permaculture stuff, and they did some terracing, and they called it put a hat on the landscape, which is at the very top. You put trees, you put a belt, so you put your terraces in the mid, and then you put shoes, which is their ponds and dams and lakes and things like that. And in 15 years, they went from desert to what actually looks better than our landscape around us. And that's fully documented, and you can watch that. It's about 30 minutes, and it's one of the best documentaries to watch, and it will change your opinion. And then you throw animals onto that, and it's unbelievable what we could potentially achieve.
Let's do it. Yes.
It didn't start that long ago. It was in 1840 with a little book that got published about how the world needed more chemicals on the ground. And that's when conventional farming started. And then it went full blast ever since, industrial farming, using salt-based minerals for fertilizer and oil-based products. And that was the decline. And it's not that long ago, so it can be reversed. And these giant farms they're insanity. Think how many people would have a higher quality life if there were 5 to 10 acre farms all across the Midwest doing permacultural, biodynamic methods. It would be a healthier group of people because we'd all be eating so much better food than the stuff that's coming out. So stepping away from that world, which I think is the mindset of most people in this space here, we could feed our total population around here with the healthiest food on a small number of farms. And
Off of an acre.
yeah.
So what would be your advice here with this community to support each other and doing that?
More events like this, but you know, going over to Sonora and visiting your place, visiting my place, and just communicating and being more vocal about we want clean food wherever you are, and going into your markets and saying, how come you guys don't have more local food? And partly we can't keep up with the demand.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's the situation.
I have a comment on that. What was your question one more time so I can repeat it?
My brain.
What can the local community do
To move forward as a local community, I feel that we all have our own jobs that we're good at. We all have that thing that gives us our spark and brings us all together as a community. And we all do different things. Not everybody is a permaculturist. Not everybody knows how to do worms. Not everybody can keep bees. But we all have something that we bring to the table that makes us strong as we are. And as long as we continue to come together at seed exchanges like this, or at our farmers markets, whatever it is, our community events, as long as we come together and talk to each other, we will continue to grow and we will become a strong community because of it, stronger than we already are. And
Lady Ryan.
What was the name of the documentary you were talking about the picture of the hat?
That would be Hope in a Changing Climate. And you can watch that on YouTube. Hope. Hope in a Changing Climate. And in my opinion, that everything that everyone can do is just follow the 3 ethics of permaculture. Care of people, care of earth, and return of surplus to the first 2 ethics. And that way everyone can be a permaculturist. You don't necessarily have to have a farm or a garden. You just have to practice those 3 principles. And then everyone's going to improve everyone's life, and everyone's going to have more diversity and more abundance, and that's just where it's going to lead. It's inevitable. So it's care of people, care of earth, and return of surplus to the first 2 ethics. So let's say I have too many tomatoes. Either I'm going to give them to someone else and return that surplus to people, or I'm going to give it to the chickens and return that surplus to the earth. So there's no such thing as waste in nature. It's always moving from one source to the other. Energy never stops moving. And energy is an apple, energy is water, energy is you, energy is everything. And energy moves from one phase to the other at all times, and it never stops moving. You start to get problems when you have, we have a saying, any elements yield not put to productive use becomes pollution. So when you have a pig farm that's 100,000 pigs on 5 acres, and they have these like 10-acre ponds of just poop, it's energy and it's a potential yield, but it's not being put to productive use, so it becomes pollution. Therefore, if that was actually put to proper use, that could be irrigation for 100,000 acres. So it's just, where is it actually going? How do you keep that cycle going? But like I said, the best thing to do is just follow the 3 principles and the 3 ethics of permaculture. And of course, just keep gardening. No matter what. If it's a bad year, just keep gardening. If it's a good year, keep gardening. If you're sad, just keep gardening. If you're happy, just keep gardening. If there's more seeds, just keep gardening. If there's no seeds, just keep gardening. No matter what, just keep gardening. And that's really the only way to fix it.
I think that's our take from the day.
Yeah, just keep gardening, just keep farming.
Keep doing.
Well, we got a little garden in our backyard, and we eat all summer what we can. What we can't eat, we can, and we eat what we can. Next year we're gonna do it all again.